everyone, and a very warm welcome to the ninth episode of the Unlocking Data series, where we uncover everything you need to know in the Web3 ecosystem about metaverse and about personal data sovereignty in the metaverse. Well, these are topics where we'll be including ownership of the data, where you can truly own your personal data. In the previous episodes, we have discussed data integrity in the AI, generative data AI, and we have also discussed the DNA data. These have been interesting topics, and we promise to bring you more and more interesting topics after every episode. So, why not deep down into today's episode where we have Peter from Transhuman, and we'll be talking about unlocking data for transhumanism. Uh, Welcome, Peter, and welcome, Mark. Mark Paul, we have here as our usual guest for the Unlocking Data series, who is the founder and CEO of EP09. Hi, Mark. Hi, Peter. How are you guys doing?
We're doing well. Thank you. Thanks for having us. Hi, Peter.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, Mark and Anita. Thank you for organizing.
So, why don't we start with like a brief little introduction about you, Peter?
Yeah, sure. My name's Peter Xing. I'm a digital and data solutions lead at KPMG, and I'm also the co-founder of Transhumanism Australia and Transhuman Coin. And it's been a pleasure working with the Ethereum team on some collaborations we've got in the works, and talking about how do we unlock this data for this transhumanist community.
That's awesome. Our community would also love to know more about the background that you come from, your past experiences in this industry, and what you're currently doing.
Yeah, I mean, typically the work I do at KPMG is around large-scale transformation data projects. In transhumanism, it's looking at how do we use science and technology to extend our healthy human lifespans? How do we use technologies that could integrate more and more with our biology to enhance our intelligence and overall living longer and healthier and smarter and also more well? So essentially making sure no one gets left behind in this data revolution.
That's great. Thank you so much for that brief introduction, Peter. We are so happy and glad to have you on our show and love to talk about something around the data. And I would love for Mark to, get into maybe a deep tech related, Q&A with you.
Cool. Thank you, Anita. And we'll bring you back in later on for some closing questions. Thank you. All right, Peter, great to have you, and super excited that you're on the show. We've known each other for a while. We've crossed our paths maybe 5 years ago, and we recently crossed paths again. And it's been really great working with you and the Transhuman Coin team, looking at this real potential of unlocking data for this. I would categorize it as a really data-hungry industry, transhumanism. So maybe we could take it all the way to its foundation. And Peter, could you maybe explain to us what is transhumanism and what this movement is about?
Yeah, no, Mark, it's so great to reconnect. And I remember 5 years ago, we're sitting in the office there with John Shea, our AI specialist, and we're looking at all this emerging technologies in Web3. And I think it's been great to see that journey with Ethereum. I'm super proud of the team there as well. And congratulations. For transhumanism, I think when we started this community in Sydney over 7 years ago, it was just about, okay, who actually understands this movement? Because the movement has been around for, I guess, since the 70s. After we landed on the moon as humanity, we thought about the future of humanity, what that would look like. Science fiction was booming around what that future of humanity looks like, whether it's around living longer and healthier. How do we actually look at AI and robotics and how that's going to help us create this abundance in the world? And a lot of that science fiction, that techno-optimism came about through this movement of how do we actually convert that into, transcending our biological limitations through this transhumanism movement. And now I think it's about over 2 million people that currently identify as transhumanists all around the world and actually growing at this stage. They're just seeing the breakthroughs that's happening on a daily basis. They look up the technology news. They see some people like Elon Musk coming out with these brain-computer interfaces and seeing monkeys controlling the game of Pong just purely through a device that's implanted in their head. And this is some sci-fi stuff. It feels like magic as technologies have transcended beyond a lot of our usual comprehensions. And what's really exciting is that as we move towards, Web3 and the metaverse, we're seeing this quantified self, quantifying the entire physical world into the digital world. And I think this is going to bring about so much potential for that means for biology, our future of science and development, in extending our human lifespans through drug discovery, and what's going to mean that we'll be able to make better predictions on how to extend our human lifespans and that integration with our biology as well. Super exciting time. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you mentioned science fiction, and to me, when I think about transhumanism, that's what comes to my mind. But as you mentioned, a lot of this is already here, right? People are working on this right now. So this is actually a revolution that's already begun. On that note, Peter, what are the areas within transhumanism's application in the real world that are you most excited about? And if you could give us some examples.
Yeah, I mean, definitely in the longevity space, we're seeing an explosion of funding activity in the longevity space because of the latest science and developments. They've identified a way to look at our biomarkers in the aging process. And they're finding a way, once you're able to measure it, then there's a way to treat it. So these are things called Yamanaka factors. And from the likes of Dr. David Sinclair, they're working at developing drugs that could actually, not only look at these biomarkers, but find treatments to either slow it down, the actual biological clock, or reverse them to an earlier stage of our lives. And the scientific community, there's still a lot of discussion because there's still early stages. You need clinical trials to prove out a lot of this to make it scientific fact. But there's just so much potential now that we're seeing trial after trial. And the added benefit is that there's going to be a convergence of AI to this space. People like in silico medicine are looking at drug discovery and finding better ways to find treatments for these either genetic diseases or essentially these drugs that could come up with solutions. And we're actually seeing the first clinical trials, phase 1 trials actually coming to life through an AI discovered drug that's come out. So really exciting times, and the funding is all over there. Including for the likes of Altos Labs. You've seen Jeff Bezos essentially, now he's sort of stepping back from Amazon, throwing billions of dollars into putting these scientists together to actually look at the aging process itself. I think there's going to be so much explosion of activity and, result and accomplishment for the next 10 years.
Yeah. Well, that's really, really, really cool. So I'm guessing a lot of this has to do with data, and I'm just trying to link the technology elements that kind of drive this movement. So what would you say, Peter, that's happening now in the technology space is driving this momentum as opposed to maybe why it wasn't happening about 5-10 years ago? What are the big developments in technology that you're seeing within transhumanism?
Yeah, definitely a convergence of technologies, whether it's computation, the ability to access, through Moore's law, more and more cloud-based computation and democratizing that as well. And then there's the sensors as these chips miniaturize, and the power actually results on-device calculations, computations through IoT. And these essentially things like being able to have better measurements about biology as well. So a company like Inside Tracker is offering the ability for you to run, annual tests or 6-monthly tests, whether it's blood tests or whether it's using your health type Fitbits type measuring, and really have that quantified self to actually help you preempt a lot of these diseases that could be affecting you. So all of that convergence, now we're talking about things like Web3, where all of that data is essentially going to be, owned by you as opposed to these cloud-based services. That's what's really exciting as well, as we democratize that space.
Wow. Yeah. That's really cool that you mentioned the 6-month test or the periodic benchmarking of your, blood or even the DNA markers and all these things. To me, like when I think about this space, like about 6 years ago, I thought like, that's probably what we need, right? Like if there's some way we could incentivize people to do like a fixed term test, right? Every 6 months, and you collect the same sort of, whether it's, let's look at blood as an example, and then the amount of data that you would unlock if you do this longitudinal test was incredible. But I know certain countries in the world actually do it. Like in India, you could very easily go and get like this full check done because it's quite affordable. But I found that in Western countries, it was not possible. I don't know if it's the economic aspects of it. What do you think would it take for, like, as an example, like a crazy experiment for a government to say, everyone in my population, we're going to pay for you to do a 6 month benchmarking of your. Do you think that's ever going to happen?
Well, I think, yeah, I think it depends on the democracies that'll drive it to make it happen. I mean, we're talking about people, really, I think it's in everyone's interest to say, what if we treated the aging process as a disease like every other disease that could be treated? And essentially, that would be the litmus test for something like the FDA approving drugs to actually solve the aging process. And that would mean that you could actually, as a result of doing this test, you can measure your aging, and that's actually a disease that you're actually seeing that's happening in the process, and you're trying to treat for that disease. And all of that will be subsidized as a result, because in Australia, for example, the PBS, you can't get on that list until it's actually a recognized disease by the government itself. And what does the government respond to? It should be representative of the people. So as transhumanists, we're trying to educate the public that aging doesn't have to be naturally accepted as something that's inevitable. This is something within the realms of physics, and it's what scientists are working on treating. It's an engineering problem, and through investment in science and technology, this is actually something that we can actually together cure for. But without the policy in place for us, for people to recognize that movement, that's what we need, that virtuous cycle to happen.
Yeah, very cool. So, what do you think would need to happen from a bottom-up approach? If you would look at this, if you want people to understand the transhumanism movement, come on board, what shift do you think needs to happen from the bottom up, right? I think you just described what could happen from the top down, policy makers. What do you think needs to happen from the bottom up to kind of drive this adoption?
Yeah, and these transhumanists, they're so awesome because they're the early adopters of these technologies. And, we call them biohackers, whether it's citizen scientists teaching others how to do these measurements and, fully quantify themselves and really take a personal, ownership of that approach. So doing the inside trackers, doing the blood tests and measuring that, and experimenting as well. I mean, within the realms of safety, because, drugs like NMN, this precursor drug to the enzymes that essentially help our cells replicate in a clean way without causing damage. These are sort of drugs that are now available over the counter, right? If you can order these on Amazon, and potentially people could actually trial this on themselves to see if it has a measurable benefit on their longevity, just purely looking at those biomarkers that we mentioned earlier. And so, yeah, every individual is now empowered because of the affordability of these devices, these tools. But at the end of the day, we really do need sort of a concerted effort, a benchmark, I guess, across what people are doing, because the scientific method is really what keeps us all on track with these things. There's a lot of snake oil, and everyone's always wanted to live forever since the beginning of civilization, right? And we need to really ground ourselves through scientific evidence-based policies as well.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so let's dive into the technology side a little bit more. What would you say I think we touched on this. It's the convergence of technologies like AI, IoT, data, big data, data science. What would you say needs to improve in this space for I would say data to be collected in the amounts that are required to run this academic rigor and scientific rigor on? Because at the end of the day, if you need to measure all these things, that's kind of how we prove that they work. What do you think is missing in the current technology ecosystem that we could improve?
I mean, yeah, I think healthcare is the toughest place to rank, right? I mean, fair enough. They do have to control the safety, ensuring people have to, don't die as a result. But this is where I think democratization comes in. Every individual should be empowered to do this. I think what it takes is that the individual should be able to opt in providing their data. My GP is still using pen and paper. And, this is sort of things that, as an individual, you should choose to go with a provider or go with a service that you can provide your information to. bring all the measurements and upload that in a private and secure way, and through protocols like yourself, and essentially find a way to not just find out what's best for you, but if researchers identify you as a potential clinical trial candidate, you should be able to also be able to monetize that as well. I mean, it should be an incentive for you to, provide that information to, the researchers out there. And it should be an incentive, almost like a gamification of trying to live healthier and for longer and better.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that's a really important part, right? So we could have all the technology, we could have all the sensors, we could have the mechanisms to suck this data in, but the health silos are kind of holding the most valuable data because they have literally been looking at us, for years, right? They're collecting this data over years, but they're all siloed up. And I do agree to your point. It's mainly for security and privacy because these concepts are difficult for a lot of people to understand. In that same sort of topic, like when we talk about me being able to go to my healthcare provider and like trying to unlock my data, I find that what's missing right now is that incentive for me to do so. Like if there was something I'm very sure that I'm going to get from doing that, I probably would. Like I would go up to my doctor and say, "Can I have a copy of my data? Even if you scan it and give it to me, I'll take it and I'll go back home." Do you think the issue here is the monetization of, like, if we were to create a method, a mechanism where people can monetize the data very easily, do you think that's incentive enough for them to go and then work out how to get their data out of the silos?
It would definitely be getting them engaged, right? It's kind of like, with the tokenomics of things right now in Web3.
Yeah.
And, you get older one day at a time, every minute by minute, right? You don't experience this aging process until it gets too late. I feel like, people look back at their lives and they're like, oh, wow, so many years has passed, but you don't realize it. But if you feel it every single day, there are apps out there now that you can continue to track and get that gamification experience. You're looking to reverse your biological age, like the health app, like those ones that I use just to gamify and encourage me to exercise and things like that. But you lose track eventually over time when you get busy, when you know that there's really nothing else to gain from it.
Yeah.
And finding a way to incentivize the right behaviors and to monetize that, I think, is actually going to do a great service for public health and for the individuals, of course, as well. And it's definitely something you would want for your family and loved ones as well, to keep them engaged.
Yeah, that's right. Where do you think, Peter, this space is heading? Like, let's say we were to solve the problem of unlocking the data silos, Web3 bringing in the economics, the token economics and stuff that incentivizes people to own and share their data. A lot like what Transhuman Coin and Ethereum are trying very hard to do. Let's imagine a world where all of this happens, and we're able to execute this like we're planned. Where do you think the future is for transhumanism? Let's look at a world 5 years down the line. Is it just people living long, or do you see a lot of other benefits?
Yeah, I mean, transhumanism, you can, I think, pave out into further future as well. I mean, we're all about transcending these basic needs around, this well-being side. So all this abundance that we could create. Robots and automated manufacturing should create all the resources that we need so that we don't have to, go do a job just for the sake of earning an income, right? We should have things like a universal basic income where we could just, in our days, spend that on the passions of what we do. And it's great that, the cryptocurrencies are enabling this through things like Proof of Humanity.
Yeah.
You can automatically get a UBI token as a result of signing up to be a unique human. But that's essentially what humanity should be striving towards. You should be rewarded for, just interacting with the world through a UBI. And this is where, sharing of information could be a way to have a path towards that as well. And we're seeing how virtual reality and augmented reality, those industries initially didn't have the momentum because there was no virtual economy supporting that. But now with Web3 and the incentivization, all the corporates are saying, oh, wow, there's actually a market for this. And I think it's going to be the same for longevity and for the individuals that participate in this world, where there is a monetary incentive to get involved. And if we can solve the basic income through, sharing and monetizing of this data, then we can actually have this utopian vision of the world as opposed to what you see on Black Mirror or Altered Carbon, these dystopian futures. So I think over the next 5 years, as the advancements in AI to create abundance for this, and the Web3 side to be able to do this monetization and securely privately sharing our data, we are going to be on that journey towards receiving this UBI through data monetization.
Very cool. I love that. So the UBI through data monetization is something we're super excited about as well. So we have this feature called NFMe. I don't want to sound like I'm plugging something here, but effectively that's what it is. It's an NFT that represents you, non-fungible me. And when we release it, it's going to be like an UBI because it's everyone in the world can get one. You don't have to buy it. It's not like the really expensive apes that you have to go and buy, but everybody's eligible for one, but it's backed by your personal data, and then you're able to then trade that data within it and earn more. So really loved that vision that you just detailed, because that's something that's really powerful. So we're coming to an end of our discussion, Peter, but I think what I'd like you to maybe walk us through is Transhuman Coin. I'd really like to know more about it, and I'm sure our community does want to know more about it. Tell me about it. How did the journey begin? What's different about it? Over to you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, thanks so much, Mark. And transhumanism, as a community, we were just meeting up because we're all passionate about science and technology and finding ways to and sharing that knowledge to educate the public. But that community, we wanted to get it to a movement where we have that circular economy for it, because we felt like, we were stagnating. There was no incentive for people to bring on new members, to continue to share this information and to actually make a difference and impact through funding of projects in the transhumanism space. So even back in 2017, we were thinking about launching the token, but obviously during that time, there was some turbulent markets, right? And then we sat on it with our co-founders in South Africa, Dr. Charles Awuzie, gone right ahead and did it. So it was perfect. It was like the end of August last year, we got involved together and actually combined our forces. And the rest of the transhumanist leadership joined, from the likes of Dr. Tashin Vidamore in the US to Jose Cordero over in Madrid. So the entire movement came together through this transhuman coin token. And the utility of it is so that we can create ways of funding these projects, like Lifespan.io, which is a crowdfunding platform for longevity projects. We donated to them. There's another company called Abby by GoGo Tech that creates autonomous wheelchairs that has future brain-computer interface integration. And our chair of scientific advisory board, Dr. Avinash Singh, is on at UTS, and he's looking at projects for brain-computer interfaces for his students to look at. I think in the future, we want to have that token as a way to reward people to essentially benefit from whether those longevity projects to super intelligence brain-computer interfaces. And one of the things that we thought about is, how do you, once you have brain-to-brain measurement and communication, how do you keep your partners happy? And a way to earn that, so earning brownie points, would be to earn transhuman coin. So by measuring happiness in the brainwaves of your partners, that would be a great incentive to tie to that relationship as well. But yeah, with transhuman coin, it's the token mechanism is that every transaction, 2% of that goes to the holders, including this fund wallet. And that's where we make our donations through the approval of the Scientific Advisory Board. We get suggestions from the amazing community. We have over 13,000 holders and a Telegram channel that's booming with activity. Now thinking about how we donate to Ukrainian biohackers and Russian biohackers to bring peace to the world through this movement, transcending all these political ideology to nation states, and just really advance the future of humanity through science and technology.
I love it, Peter. I mean, that's for me, that's the power of crypto and Web3, right? Because you could create a tokenized incentive model that really creates this bottom-up pressure, right? Like you put it in the hands of the people, and almost always, like when you do this, you realize that good's coming out of it, right? When you empower your community, you see that there's good coming out of it. So I think that's really powerful, and I think that's what concepts like DAOs and stuff really excite me, because it's amazing what you can do when you empower your community with proper token economics. Thanks for the wonderful chat, Peter. I'm going to bring Anita back and.
Okay, so closing this wonderful and insightful, episode on a very interesting question for Peter. So, Peter, apart from besides what you're doing, at Transhumanism, what else do you do, and what excites you?
Yeah, I really don't have any time for anything else other than more tech science and just keeping up with the latest and greatest in news. I think YouTube has been curating based on the algorithm of all the latest science and technology videos that are out now. So it always recommends me to watch more. So that's really just going to take up more of my time. But it's been a pleasure as well to hear the amazing journey that you guys have been on, and it's great to reconnect with Mark after these years. And thank you so much, Anita, for hosting this facilitation as well.
Thank you so much for taking out the time and being on our show. It was such a pleasure, getting to talk to you for the first time. I obviously feel that, okay, Mark knows him for 5 years. Why did I not know this guy for 5 years? Have I been missing out on so much? But it is such a pleasure talking to you and knowing from you.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks so much for coming, Peter. And we hope to have you again in another show. We can talk a bit more about transhumanism and just tech in general.
Yeah, looking forward to it, Mark.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.